I'm going to keep an eye on the waiting room and let people in as we go, but I'll go ahead and get us kicked off. This is such an important topic tonight. Thank you all so much for joining us. As we all know, we have a crisis and it's called family court. We have children who are being placed in very dangerous situations by the system that is supposed to be protecting them. We have family courts who are prioritizing profit and parental rights over child safety. And what we're witnessing, I often say it's not a broken system. It is working exactly the way it was designed to work. And it really has become for lack of a better description, an industrial complex with predictable pipelines, devastating outcomes. And at the center of so much of this is professionals who are exploiting the system for personal gain. They are, especially within what we call the reunification industry, where it is really pro contact at all costs. It is an agenda that fuels a highly profitable, largely unregulated business model. And many of these court ordered interventions that we're seeing, there is no evidence of effectiveness. But they're very lucrative, and so often these they are traumatizing children that they are claiming to help. And we are here because this should never have been normalized and it cannot continue. We are here because real change is going to require all of us, advocates, survivors, professionals, concerned citizens, everyone linking arms and coming together. I first stepped into the family court system 15 years ago, and things were bad back then. But each year I have watched things get worse and worse. And if we don't come together, if we don't mobilize across every state and demand meaningful change, this crisis is not going to end with us. It is going to echo through future generations. So what can we do? The answer is everything. I am a firm believer that this crisis has to be tackled from every angle. We need community awareness. We need media exposure, accountability, education, legislative change. There is no single solution. It's going to require a united, multifaceted response, and it really requires all hands on deck. And tonight we are honored to be joined by two extraordinary women who are fearlessly confronting systemic injustice and working to reshape the family court system through advocacy and unwavering determination. So it is my pleasure to introduce first Hera McLeod, a Washington, D.C. based writer, speaker, tech leader, and civil rights activist. She is known for speaking out against the silence, particularly on topics of civil rights for women and children, domestic violence, family court reform. She's been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Seattle Times, and she's been featured on the Today Show, Crime Watch Daily, and the Discovery Plus series, Citizen PI. Her memoir, Defying Silence, a memoir of a mother's loss and courage in the face of injustice, tells a chilling story of domestic abuse and the deep fractures in the American justice system that leave women and children vulnerable. Hera has testified before the United States Congress, the Maryland state legislator, and she is helping to reform legislation in the areas of family court and child protection. how she came into this work. In 2012, October, Hera's 15-month-old son, Prince, was drowned by his father. And he had taken out multiple life insurance policies on Prince. The only thing that I can imagine more devastating than losing a child is knowing that it was preventable. If only the courts had listened to her repeated warnings. Hera's advocacy is a vow to Prince and a promise that his story will not be forgotten. And she has become a voice for every child that the system fails to protect. Annie Kenny is a certified high conflict divorce coach and victim and child safety advocate. She leads Bloom Consulting to support protective parents and to champion family court reform. She serves on her local family violence coordinating council and was a panel in the Allen versus Farrow docuseries. She spoke at the 2022 and 2024 Battered Women's Conference and has shared her personal story on WJLA. She has also published a family court op-ed in the Washington Post, and she has worked with Maryland lawmakers, testified before the U.S. Senate, and currently serves as board president for Family Court Awareness Month. She has played a key role in passing Maryland's Senate Bill 7B, SB 17 in 2022 and mandating that will mandate 20 hours of specialized training for judges in family court cases involving domestic abuse and child abuse. In 2023, she created and passed SB 57, a bill that strengthens supervision and increased penalties for those convicted of sexually abusing children, minors. Annie has co-authored Stop the Silence, Thriving After Child Sexual Abuse, and she teaches through the master's program at the Institute on Violence, Abuse, and Trauma, where she educates on policy reform and systems advocacy. Annie became involved after her ex-husband was convicted of sexually abusing her oldest daughter, yet this court still allowed him unsupervised access to her younger daughters. That experience compelled her to be a powerful and unwavering voice for her own children and for countless others in the fight for safety, justice, and systemic change. So I now have the privilege of passing the mic to these two remarkable women, Hannah, Hera, and Annie. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having
Thank you,
us.
Tina. Yes.
Wanna take it?
Okay. So yeah, I guess we'll just kind of dive right in. You heard Hera and I both didn't really intend to get started in this realm, but I think a lot of legislative change comes from finding a loophole. And unfortunately, a lot of times a legal loophole is found when something terrible happens. So the first place you generally want to start if you are trying to figure out how to change some of the laws in your own state would be to find your state's General Assembly website. And it really is quite simple as Googling Maryland General Assembly or whatever your state is, and it will find the website for you, pull it up, and then there's some key things that you want to be looking for there as you kind of get familiar with your state's General Assembly. Usually there's a list of important dates where you can see where things start up, where everybody is in session and talking about bills, where bills are being introduced. There's dates where it's all over, and it's usually not as big of a window as we would have liked. It's kind of a crunch time. Usually you can find who your actual representatives are in both the Senate and the House. Most websites actually have an ability to just enter in your home address, and then it would pull up who your direct representatives are. They are usually the best place to start if you want to have somebody look into an issue and potentially sponsor a bill. You're their constituent. They want to be reelected. Um, your voice matters most to your specific representative. So that's a really good place to start, is finding out who represents you and reaching out to them with the issue that you're concerned about. Um, Another place to look is looking at the various committees. So the General Assembly is sectioned out into groups of legislators who specialize in looking at certain types of issues. So some people, there's a finance committee, an educational committee, things of that nature. We're generally focused on the judicial committees. Um, and those are the ones who would be looking at these types of bills first. So they are also the legislators that you would want to be getting in touch with. There's committee chairs, and then there's members of each committee. Um, but the very first thing is to try to connect with the right legislators with the issue that you're concerned about, and see if you can get anyone on board with moving forward with creating um, a bill and being willing to sponsor that bill and move it forward.
Uh-oh, sorry. One more thought about this before moving on. I know Annie and I, we've talked about this a lot about like before you get started, it's really helpful to like figure out if there's anybody already doing work in the area that you care about in your state, because I know oftentimes, especially like, you know, on the heels of a very traumatic situation, I know at least for myself, I was like, I want to burn the world down, right? And so I think before you start drafting a bill and doing that work, it's helpful to see if there's any existing efforts that you can add your time to. And that way, instead of trying to like bifurcate or fracture, you can work together and make your voice louder. Uh, and and also, did you already mention like looking at other states to see what other states have done? Um,
No, but that's a huge selling point when you are trying to move forward with something in your own state. Is a lot of people don't want to start at the beginning. They want to know what's been passed, what is making progress, who's doing what. And so having comparable legislation is a really good place to start also. It helps any legislators that you approach feel as though this is something that could happen, because that's another thing. Yes, you hope that they care about the issue, but many times they're also very motivated by whether or not it's going to go anywhere. So, giving them something that feels like they might be able to be successful with it can be a lot more motivating than just saying, I have this problem.
Yeah, I know one thing that, at least in the state of Maryland, tends to move people is we're like, if you were like, well, Colorado has, like all these bills and we're just lagging behind, like we're
Yeah.
seen as like the country bumpkins that are like, not doing anything or whatever. And they do not like to hear that. So it can be
Mhm.
very helpful to explain, that we're trying to just be on the cutting edge.
Yeah. You can also, usually the websites give some keyword search options too that can help you see what may have already been introduced last year. If you're looking for things like judicial training or child abuse, you might be able to find some bills that have been worked on and just never made it all the way through, which is very common. This is a very discouraging process. We should probably lead off with that part.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more losses than wins. Um, but that can also be a good place to start too. And that would even tell you which legislators had been working on that specific bill, and you could start with that too.
I will also say, like, do your research when you choose a sponsor as well. So to this next point here, like uh you don't get to actually speak for your bill, right? Like you get to testify for it, but even if you've like actually drafted it and you've been like very deep in the process and you've put your blood, sweat, and tears, you have to rely on the elected official to be the person to speak for the bill. And I have had several moments where I'm just like, man, if I could just grab them and speak through them, this would be so
Yeah.
much easier. So you want to make sure you're choosing somebody who's very articulate. I know that this sounds crazy because you just make the assumption that these people are very articulate, but I hate to break it to you. Like in some of the local districts, I mean, if you like go to the popular restaurant and shake two people's hands, you might get elected, right? So you have people out there that are, it's a mixed bag, right? So at least in how it is in Maryland, it is helpful to do things like go to the crab bake, right? Or, you know, go to the events where you can actually meet these people and start trying to have conversations. And if you want to get out of that conversation in the first like 30 seconds, that's not your person, right? Like, because chances are everybody else who's on that like legislative committee also does not want to talk to that person, does not want to hear what that person has to say. And choosing the wrong sponsor could end up being part of the problem.
Yeah, very much so. Um, that person is essentially in charge of the sales pitch. And there will be hearings and there'll be times that even the various advocates helping with the bill do not get to speak at all. There's some venues where we do and we get to share our stories, but we're limited to less time. And you know, they don't generally cut off the bill sponsors. They're the ones who are able to really talk about it. And if they have not paid attention and they're not prepared, then it really kind of tanks the whole process.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
sometimes they don't get it, right? And so it's hard
Hmm.
because we can, you know, prepare them and all this stuff. So if you are meeting with them and you're sort of vetting people and you're like, wow, this person doesn't seem to really get it, probably want to pass on them. Even if they're super excited about your bill. You could be like, hey, you could co-sponsor it. That's awesome, right? Like, we love your support, but like, do not choose them to
But you
co-sponsor.
can't be the point of contact. You can't be the
Can't be the
first person
POC.
speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, once you've started all of that and perhaps successfully teamed up with one legislator or multiple legislators and somebody's on board with taking your concern and making it into a bill, they generally have a legal team that works to draft the language of the bill. That's where it becomes super helpful that if there's another state that's already passed it, or if there's something from a previous year, it makes that process a lot more effective. They already kind of know what language works and what doesn't. Um, be prepared for a lot of concessions to that language over the course. I see a lot of people, a lot of advocates feel incredibly frustrated when a bill that they supported and had 10 very important things in it gets, you know, dwindled down to 3 very important things. But you know, that's the art of policy work here is there's a lot of negotiation, there's a lot of changing, and none of the bills that we ever get passed are perfect. It's all about some steps in the right direction. And if we wait for the perfection, we don't get any progress at all. So anyway, once you've gotten to your bill draft and got it laid out as to what it's going to start as, then the bill is given a number, it's introduced either on the Senate or on the House. If you're lucky, you have sponsors on both, and it can be introduced on both sides. And then at that point, once it's introduced and kind of officially announced and given its number, it's assigned to a committee to look at it a little more closely. That's where these bills end up going to the Judicial Committee. And the Judicial Committee is in charge of one, scheduling a hearing where this is where the advocates can show up, the bill sponsors show up, and everybody comes and discusses the bill, kind of puts forth the pitch of the bill, explains why the bill is important. If you're lucky, sometimes the legislators engage and ask questions, and I always feel like it's a good sign. It can be a chance for conversation, and then you wait because committee is where most bills go to die. It's kind of like an inside joke, but it's the truth because after that point, it's up to that judicial committee to eventually decide to vote for the bill. Either they're going to vote that yes, this should move forward, or they're going to vote no, this isn't a good idea. And it's mind-blowing the number of bills that don't even get voted on at all. So just because you've gotten one started and you've gotten it created and you get to have a hearing and you're doing all of this talking and you're feeling like you're really accomplishing something, well, now we have to get them to vote for it. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen some OMB calls to action and things like that when we're trying to encourage the legislators to go ahead and vote. But that's really the next step, is to make sure that the Judicial Committee in either the Senate or the House, whichever side you're on, not only heard your bill and paid attention to your bill, but now we need them to vote on that bill, or just nothing happens after that point.
Yeah, I'd also mention one thing that's important through the whole process is knowing your opposition, right? And knowing what the motivations are on both sides, because what I've found is that there are the very verbal opponents, and it's easier to craft a narrative to try and combat that. But then there is just the deep-seated, like, political nuisance type of opponents, and those are, at least in Maryland, like, that's where the legislators will more likely not vote on a bill having to do with child protection than vote, because if their vote is a no, because whatever on the other side is pulling them in that direction. And like I always tell my kids, ain't nothing free. Like, everybody has some motivation. It may not be financial, it may be something else like political aspirations or whatnot. But what's really hard is that in this area, particularly when you're talking about the protection of children, having the bill go up means if someone's going to be a no, their voting record will reflect that they were a no against a bill that had child protection. So I think one of our biggest challenges is that it just won't go up for a vote because they don't actually want to make public how they feel about it, which can be even more frustrating, because I would rather a no, because if it's a no, I can plaster your name all over ads and be like, yo, guess who doesn't care about kids, right? And they know this, right? Which is typically why, like Annie said, it like goes to die in committee.
Yeah, they generally just avoid voting on it if they're not going to vote on it positively. Apparently child safety is actually quite controversial. Um, and so that poses a lot of problems. You would think it's not, but there's a lot of resistance. And unfortunately, we also see resistance even from organizations that you believe are advocate organizations. Sometimes we see people who come in and they say that they are supportive of the bill, but with these changes or something like that. And they're really there to stall it out. Not every organization that claims to be an advocate really is one. And there's a lot of, this is the very discouraging phase of all of this. You see a lot of things that are surprising. So if you just expect it ahead of time, that will really make it more tolerable.
Okay, so in committee hearings, you can provide either oral testimony or written testimony or both. Um, this is probably like the most influence potentially, or like the time that you can actually get your story in front of these people that are going to be making these laws. And so from personal experience, I will say you're essentially signing up to walk through your trauma for the sake of progress. And similar to like cancer research, it is unlikely to actually help your case, right? Like, you are doing this and you are walking through your trauma so that other kids can be safe, right? So that's number one. And like, to do that, I think one of the most important pre-steps is to get yourself to a place where you can stand in front of a group of people and you can talk about the most traumatic thing that has ever happened in your life, likely, and do it with, like, very briefly, within 2 to 3 minutes. Stay on brand. Like, it has to be brief and clear. And you want to highlight the most important issues of your story that actually have something to do with the bill. So, for example, I could walk through a death march through my entire story, and it's like the worst Lifetime movie you've ever seen, right? And there's lots of different facets about the case that, could use some reform. I wrote an entire book about it, right? But when I testified for the judge training bill that Annie had mentioned earlier, I had to pick out what about this judge I think would have been different. And there's a lot of things that it could have been, if they had been different, my son would still be here. But for that particular bill, I was like, he made several mistakes when it came to determining what constituted child abuse. And so I specifically chose to repeat that he had told me that in order for my son's case to be considered a child in need of action in Maryland, my son would have had to come home with cigarette burns on his back. And unfortunately, my son came home in a body bag. And so I couldn't go back to court and do anything about it. And if he had been trained in like how to properly evaluate a case involving child abuse, then perhaps he would not have had such a whacked out threshold for what constitutes a child in need of action case. And so I think in that, what I always tell people is like 2 to 3 minutes is not very long. Practice your elevator pitch, right? And it is very helpful to get together with the other folks that are testifying on a bill. We did this just recently, all three of us actually, in conjunction with a few other advocates, where we're trying to pass legislation about education for
Custody evaluators.
custody evaluators. Yes, I've like already forgotten because it's so traumatic.
It is traumatic.
So we all got together and basically shared what part of our story we would be sharing as part of the testimony, and because we wanted it to fit together like a puzzle, right? If one person shares the same thing as the next person, their ears are just going to close, right? And so it was really helpful that we were all able to hit it from a different point. And of course, they all had intersections with like custody evaluators that didn't know what they were doing. But we had a through line, and everybody had a part of the same message. So super important, stay on brand, work with the other advocates. Do you have anything that you wanted to add, either of you? Because I feel like so much that we could say about
I know
this.
it is so hard, and but like you said, a big piece is identifying what aspects of your story really matter for what you're trying to tell now and what the bill in front of you is. And that can be really hard to self-edit because you feel as though without the whole story, they're not understanding it. But it's important. The time goes incredibly fast. And so for the sex offender bill that I worked on, I focused on the behaviors that my ex-husband was getting away with that weren't breaking any laws. And then for the judicial training bill, I talked about, again, like what was said in the courtroom. It's identifying which pieces really highlight it. Um, and I had my first year testifying, I had a state's attorney who had kind of introduced me into this realm and helped me get started because, again, I found something that wasn't against the law that she thought should be against the law. And so she was very, very helpful in kind of paving the way. And she told me that what I needed to remember was that my voice was the most important one they were hearing that day. She said they're sick of hearing their, colleagues talk, the legislators talk. They're all in there for the same things to kind of look good, maybe make some change, but they have their different motivations and things like that. And she said, it's the people with the real stories that they want to hear. That's what is most impactful. So she told me just not to ever feel as though I don't belong there, as though they don't care what I have to say. Um, and I'll even say that most years that I've testified, um, committee chairs have made kind comments afterwards. And, they know it's hard, they know it's difficult. And you want to be cognizant of time, you want to be focused, you want to go. But, twice my daughter Nora testified too, and I noticed that the committee chairs stopped the timer for her and just let her talk. Now, she had practiced to be at the 2 minute mark, but I just noticed that and appreciated that. I think they understand that it's not easy for people to show up and talk about something very traumatic and try to use it so openly. Again, like Hera said, what we're doing doesn't help us in any way. It's too late for our situations, and it's too late for so many situations. And another thing that I should put in here is, please don't testify if it's not safe for you to do so yet. Your time will come. There's a lot of other ways that you can help in the meantime, whether it's helping to gather contact information or things like that when there's a call to action. But top priority for you should be making sure that you protect yourself. And we all know from our personal cases that there are times where it's simply not safe to go there. So if it's not safe for you, please prioritize that and let the others do their stories for the time being. It's kind of, I feel like it's revolving. We get through and we go back for the others, and then sometimes we get stuck again, and you know.
So I would also say, like, I think, like, when I heard your daughter testify, it's something that will stick with me my whole life. Like, she did such a fantastic job. And um even if you testify on something that doesn't end up being successful in that particular round, I think that what is really helpful is that we continue to go in and we continue to tell our stories, and we continue, because these stories will sit with them, right? And there will
Mhm.
be a moment where I feel like the collective voice will get loud enough that they will realize, wait a second, I don't want to be on the wrong side of history here, right? Because it's at that point where, I mean, I even reached out to several of them afterwards. I'm like, how could you listen to a 15-year-old tell you what she told you and then not vote, right? Like, that is just, and I'm like, I want you to think about that, because when you are on your deathbed, like, you should think about what side of history you were on, right? Like, I know that's, I mean, that's like morbid perhaps, but I'm like, this is a big deal, right? Like, a lot of times they don't get a chance to even vote on something that's all that important. Like, they were talking about the difference between insects and animals the other day. And it's like, are you kidding?
Spent
Like,
an hour. They spent an hour talking about the difference in language between an insect and an animal.
And
right.
we joked internally, do we dress our children up like insects and animals and parade them through? Because you're desperate. How much more do you need to act?
Yeah.
So
But
what Hera's referring to is the Judicial Committee in the Senate this year, just several days ago, decided they would not be voting on the custody evaluator training bill that we've now spent 5 years. It's been 5 sessions that we've
yeah.
tried. This year, they brought it up they put it on the voting list. Actually, Hera and Nora sent um, the chair and vice chair a nice email thanking them for putting it on the voting list and how excited she was. And then they decided they would just put it off and study it over the summer, despite the fact that we've done this 5 years in a row. So we're a bit salty that our bills just died after
I
after
sent
we
many a text message after that. So I was like, so we're going to study for 5 more years? Like, how many kids are going to die while we're sitting here studying? And like, just,
I mean, yeah,
it's insane.
yeah, yeah.
Um, okay, so written testimony is similar to oral testimony, except you have more space because you can actually write. Typically, what I do is I will do both, and you don't actually have to do oral testimony that matches your written testimony. And written testimony is also a really great way to address the opposition in a very like clear way. So you can actually put it into your little 5 paragraph situation. And typically what I try to do is I try to have a paragraph that's like a counter message. Like, I know some people will say that, parental alienation is a thing. However, it's actually not, and it has nothing to do with this. So let's stop talking about this now, because it's not what we're talking about. Um, and so yeah, I encourage people to really do both. And if you can't testify in person, I think it's still really good to do both, because your testimony that's written, it actually is out there. So you could Google our names and you can see the testimony previously. if you want some ideas about how to write one of these, you could also, search previous testimony that has been written. Super helpful. I know, uh, Tina, you had mentioned about Chat GPT. I have all kinds of feelings about AI that I could
Yeah.
go into depth and I won't, but do you want to, I think it could be helpful for some folks too.
Yeah, what I had shared previous to our webinar was that these new AI tools and programs that are coming out, for if you are struggling to tell your story or to match your story to the bill and hit key points, you can upload the entire bill to ChatGPT or another program and then almost brain purge your story. It doesn't have to be concise or perfect, and upload it and ask to give me a 1 minute or a 2 minute testimony that would match up and speak to some of the key points in the bill. And I know a lot of survivors are doing that, and it's incredibly helpful. So
Definitely. My only note of warning is sometimes ChatGPT gives you things that like are nonsensical. So just make sure it makes sense before you read it.
yes.
Awesome. Okay. Committee voting. I know we kind of already covered this a little bit, but to your point earlier, Annie, about dying in committee.
Yeah. So, um, yes, it's very likely that your bill, especially if it's your very first time, doesn't make it out of committee. They either don't vote for it or they vote no. It's more common that they just don't vote for it. Um, but theoretically, if they vote for it and they vote yes, then it goes up to the entire House or Senate floor where it gets voted on two more times. But unless it is an incredibly controversial bill with a lot of publicity, generally the entire floor follows the lead of the committee. It's generally assumed that the committee that um, thought the bill was worthwhile and okay and pushed it through, that they're the experts. They're the ones that studied it and spent the time on it. So usually if you can get out of committee and you get to the floor, they vote on it two more times and then you're good. Except then it goes to the other chamber and you do all of it all over again. So you really need a whole lot of really right steps to happen in order to get anywhere. And again, another key point is the very specific dates that session starts versus when session ends, because I've seen many times where we thought we were getting there and we got through and we got to this point and we got to that point, and then the clock just runs out. It is truly as dramatic as that sounds. You stay up till midnight, you watch them rush through different bills, and yours just never gets back up onto the list, and then that's it. And you wait until the next year. So um it's actually kind of absurd if you stop and think about it a little bit. But anyway, out of committee, if the vote's positive, it gets voted on again, and then generally it goes over to the other chamber. This is another piece of why, if you're able to find sponsors in both the House and the Senate, it can be a lot more powerful in getting it passed through, because then you only have to do it in each side, hopefully kind of at the same time. Otherwise, you've got to go all the way through one and then start all over in the other and go through. And unless somebody's really trying hard to help you pass that bill, it usually kind of run out of time. So
Yeah, and again, choose the right sponsors, right? Because what
yep.
can also happen is that if you choose somebody who is politically unpopular, who has a tendency to not support other people's bill, it does not matter what your bill says. They're going to be like, you know what? You didn't play with me in the sandbox yesterday, so I'm
This
not going to
has
support your bill.
happened to me specifically. It has happened.
Yeah.
So and I think that's another piece to remember. No matter how hard you work here and how much you follow the steps or connect with the right people or do everything possible, it really just boils down to whether or not certain legislators want to make it pass. And
Mm.
what you do has not a whole lot of control over that. Sometimes public pressure, sometimes, there's some things that can, but for the most part, it just comes down to whether or not key players want to.
Yeah,
And
I think the hard part on the local level that I've noticed, and I mentioned this a little bit in the beginning here, is like a lot of people don't pay attention and don't vote for like local politics, right? And so I think it makes it even harder because you could have somebody, I mean, there's a guy in Maryland who like threw his wife through a glass door and is still serving as a legislator. And so it like there's just people that normally if there were any attention on these people, they would not be in these positions, right? Not to say that they're all like that, but it's just that like for a large portion of our country, they're just not paying attention to local politics and should, right? So I think that like part of the advocacy is also to whatever extent possible going out in your community and being like, you need to vote for these people, right? You need to learn who they are. You need to go to the crab bake or wherever they, are hanging out, and you need to make sure you understand who these people are and what their motivations are. um and then just keep trying, right? Because it may
yeah,
not work the first time or the second time or the third time or whatever, but I think each time you're chipping away and you're learning more about how it works in your.
that's it. A big piece is learning. And if you can look at the process as successful by the information you're learning rather than successful based on whether or not you pass it, I think it becomes a lot more sustainable. Because if you're just counting the success as whether or not your bill passes, you're going to be discouraged all the time. I'm sorry, but that's kind of the reality of it. And so, a lot of times it's just about showing up and learning the players. And I mean, even in some personal ways, just feeling empowered that you've done something and you've figured out how to connect with some of these people. And like Hera said, a lot of these stories, they stay with them, even if you didn't get the result you were looking for. But a lot of it, I think you just need to remember it's more about the process and learning for next year and continually trying to adjust strategy and who's against it and why and who's for it and why. And those players change each year too, because it's more about who they like than less about the specifics a lot of times. So, and that's why so much of this is kind of conceptual. There's no kind of like family court, right? There's no concrete, clear, guaranteed path that's going to get you anywhere. So a lot of it is about taking what you see and hear and then going back to the drawing board for next year. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
we're already all
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about
we
this.
already
and
we
So
already got
just
one.
like family court, it's a marathon, and sometimes
Yeah.
it's an ultra marathon, and you have to pace yourself and prepare for that. Absolutely.
mhm.
Yeah, so even outside of session, I know that Annie, you had spoken about like the session and the time limits. I think that another thing that's important to understand is that there's always something that you could be doing to like learn the system, meet people, network with people, because politics is a lot about like who you know and who likes you, and like, I don't smoke cigars, but like my dad smokes cigars with a lot of these people, and he's always like, oh, so and so is in the cigar bar, and I'm like, okay, well, you need to drop the bill that in tell so and so to vote for them, right? So these are things that you can be doing even when it's out of session. Um, and I think that uh, like figuring out like how the local politics plays and also making sure that you're not reinventing the wheel, like all of the learnings that we've had even with this one bill that Annie and I and Tina are talking about that died this week. Like we have learned a lot through the process of dealing with just this one bill. And so if you are in a place where there's already been some activity, which I can guarantee you in any state at this point, there's probably at least a few people that are talking about the same issues that we're talking about. So while you are in the middle of off session or what have you, like what you can be doing is like looking around to see how you can get connected with these folks, so that you're not having to like learn what they've already learned, and you can instead just add your voice to an existing situation.
Yeah. Another piece to that is, and I probably should have been more specific about the timeline before. So the dates of session are just the dates that the bills are actually being introduced and all of this process is happening. However, getting a sponsor and getting the bill drafted and all of that takes months and months and months. And so, like for instance, in Maryland, legislative session is January through April. So over the summer is when we're knocking on doors and trying to figure out who we're going to be working with. And by fall, we know who our sponsors are, and we're working on the specific language. No one is going to slow down and try to learn a new bill once session's already happening. It's just so chaotic and busy. And so, yes, you need to know all of those important dates so that you know when things have to happen, but it's that downtime where you want to, like Hera was saying, connect. And that's where you're really going to identify whether or not somebody's going to sponsor something for you, and they'll start doing the drafting.
Advocacy and mobilization. This is probably, I don't know, Tina, you're really good at this. I feel like every time we have a bill,
Yeah.
I'll be like, Tina,
She's the coordinator for
we
this
need, we need
part.
a shout out on
No,
the social
and
medias.
yeah, and there's so much that goes into the strategy of it because sometimes you want to keep things very quiet and moving forward so that the opposition doesn't know what's happening, but then there's other times where it's like all hands on deck, it's go time, and we need, one of the things we've done lately, yes, having constituents within a state is so powerful, and that's what should be happening. But there are also times where it's really powerful for a legislator in Maryland to hear that someone in Ireland is keyed into what is happening and are counting on them to set the precedent of we care about children. And so there is, I think connecting in the survivor groups and the advocacy groups and really starting to form, people connect with other people, take the lead. I know when I look at the One Mom's Battle chapters, the private groups, there are some states that are incredibly active: Georgia, Tennessee, California, Washington State, Texas. But then there are other states where it's crickets. And so it really takes somebody saying, hey, let's come together and do this and have a Zoom call next week. And so, yeah.
And
Yeah.
then this piece needs to be very strategic and aligned with the legislators that are sponsoring your bill. You loud and bold and angry is not always the way to go. And sometimes it backfires. And so it's very important to make sure that the legislators that are tied to your bill and everybody that's working on that bill is kind of aligned with, here's when we make noise, here's when we be quiet. Because if you start pissing people off, this isn't an arena that you get very far with that tactic, unfortunately. So there's got to be a lot of awareness in what to launch, who to be contacting, what to be saying, and really collaborating so that everybody's on the same page is important.
Yeah, I think even like outside of specific legislation, one of the first ways that I got involved with advocacy was just writing, because I felt like there were so many things that were happening and so many people in our country that had no idea, because if they had never been in the system, like before I was in the system, I had no idea. I was like, well, of
Mhm.
course I'm going to get custody. Well, of course he's going to get supervised visitation. Like, I was just
Yeah.
like so naive and didn't understand how things worked. And so part of what I wanted to do in the beginning was just like writing about it and telling people about what's happening, right? And even if choose an op-ed to write, or if you're not getting published in like a major newspaper first, like just writing a blog, or like trying to figure out ways to get pieces of your story out there so that people have a better understanding of what's happening. And you don't even necessarily need to be a writer to do this. You could go on like I don't know, TikTok at this point, right? And just like do a TikTok video to be like, you will never believe this craziness, right? Because sometimes when we tell people our story, it's like the craziest thing they've ever heard. And I'm just like, no, for real, like it's true. I'll give you the court records here. Like I swear to God, this happened, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that can be a form of advocacy in and of itself. And when you then like, I think the more you start to try to refine like what your message is, there will be natural fits for like certain legislation. Like, oh yeah, like why didn't that judge know about how to deal with like, this type of case or whatever. Cool. Oh man, I think we spoke about this,
Touched
man.
on this, yeah.
Uh-huh. Yes. Pace
It's
yourself, be prepared to have the life sucked out of you. There are some very, very exciting moments. They're usually followed with very, very disappointing moments. But if you can stick with it for 10 years, you're bound to have a win or two. And but again, in the meantime, you're making it so other people can be doing it. And I think that's more of the thing. The bigger picture is that over time, the more individuals that are getting involved in legislation and policy work and all of that, the more reform we're going to see. It's, that aspect is just pure volume in numbers, and seeing other people do it is very motivating and really can help give confidence that they can do it too. Um, but yeah, it's like Tina says, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. Um,
And
and
sometimes
that's
it's just planting that seed of awareness because, like, Hera mentioned, we walk into the system, we have no idea. We just think everybody is there to protect kids. We tell the truth. And that is the reality. The general public believes that also. This is only a topic we've been talking about in the past, 5 years. It's really amplified. But a lot of these lawmakers, we even see it at the local level with someone's getting a proclamation for Family Court Awareness Month from their mayor at a city council meeting. People are looking at us sideways, wondering, what do you mean they don't protect kids in family court? And so planting those seeds of awareness is part of what we're doing. It's critical.
Yeah, I think someone asked me recently like why they were like, your son is not here anymore and like your daughter's like I chose to be a single mom by choice because I never wanted to go back to family court, which is a whole nother story, but they were like, why are you doing this? Like you have no stake in this anymore. And I said to them like part of the reason that I keep doing this is that I don't get the opportunity to parent my son anymore. Like he's not here. And so part of how I parent him is making sure that other kids are safe. And so it helps me because I'm like, I can't just do nothing, right? Like I can't just
yeah.
make it be about nothing. So even though like it's not going to help my case and I don't have a kid in the system or whatever, um, I also care. I also know that like we don't live in a bubble. And I tell legislators this all the time. I'm like, you may not think you have to care about this because maybe you're in like a loving marriage or like, you have a great co-parent, but I just implore you to think about that kid that has been abused for 16 years and tortured. And next thing you know, they're knocking on your door and they want to take your daughter to prom. It's now your problem, right? So like I say that to say that like it is very hard to go through it, but doing it can also be empowering. It can also help you like heal because you're basically taking control of your own narrative and and you're surviving something instead of being like labeled as a victim. Like for me, I hate the word victim. I'm like, I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor, right? But I think that is part of it. Like I think it can be a traumatized like a re-traumatizing experience, but also part of the healing process to be able to take back your narrative and try to like actually make things better. I think we talked about this too.
Yep. So this is I mean, this is something you can do when I think we talked about looking at past legislation to see what's going on, but if you're not wanting to really kind of do all of the legwork of pursuing legislators and trying to come up with a bill or something like that, and you want to start a lot smaller scale, again, most of the General Assembly websites do keyword searches where once session has started, you can search for certain terms like domestic violence or child abuse, sexual abuse, whatever the things are that you would like to be supporting. And it'll show you what bills are out there that are being worked on. And I would suggest step one is probably contact the office of the bill sponsor and let them know that you would like to help support this bill, and they can let you know if they want written testimony or oral testimony or wherever it is in the process. But yeah, it a lot of it's a lot easier to get started by kind of jumping in on a bill that's already being worked on, that already has a group of people, that's already been crafted. So if it seems very overwhelming to try to start from the ground up and pursue, then maybe this is a good option for you, because you know, there's only going to be so many bills. There's only going to be so many things going on. You don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. There may already be the bills that you actually even would want to be creating might already be in existence in your state, and then you can just jump on that and work to support those and help to get those passed.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add, like, since doing this work is hard, make sure you protect your peace and notice when you're getting triggered by something, because if mama or daddy ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. So it's really hard to like help others if you sort of haven't helped yourself. All right. So this is where you can find us.
And I think, is this the last slide? I'll go ahead and close us out. There's the last slide. We each have a book.
Hmm.
You know, here's the reality. Here's what I know. We can sit around and commiserate about how flawed this system is. It's a conversation I've been listening to and having for over a decade, but talking about it isn't going to do anything. This is really about lighting a path forward. And I hope everyone on this call or everyone who listens to this video will consider this to be your official call to action. Annie and Hera are powerful examples of what it looks like to take sadness and anger and frustration and justified rage and turn it into action. Their courage, their determination is not only inspiring, but they've really created a roadmap. And I have a lot of gratitude to both of you, because you are out there and truly making changes, and we all need to come together and be a part of that, mobilizing state by state and getting involved. So I hope that this is a call to action for everyone to become part of the change and part of the solution.
Thanks for having
Thank
me.
you so much for hosting this, Tina.
Absolutely.